Welcome to Talk to Brazil with Tom Reaoch, the business connector to business in Brazil. Welcome to Talk to Brazil, the world's first English language internet radio program about business in Brazil, now in podcast format. I'm Tom Reaoch and your host for the show. I'm talking from the city of Campinas in the state of São Paulo, Brazil, so when you talk to Tom, you talk to Brazil and the world. Today's guest is Niels Leidecker, talking to us today from Belo Horizonte in Minas Gerais. And Niels Leidecker is Danish of origin and moved to Belo Horizonte, Brazil in 2007. From then on, he has used his background with technology development, business model innovation, and business development to help foreign companies enter into the Brazilian market. He has been involved in market entry of companies from various segments such as information technology, telecommunications, energy efficiency, solar energy, and financial services. Niels and I have met several times, the first time being at a Danish networking group in São Paulo, and also in Belo Horizonte, where we discussed the alternative energy opportunities in Brazil, especially for small and medium-sized companies. So with that, Niels, welcome, and thanks for being part of Talk to Brazil.
Thank you very much, Thomas, and thank you for the invitation. I'm very thrilled to be here again and talk to you.
No, it's good, always good to have you because, as I mentioned, we've spoke many different times and we share many of the same views of where we think Brazil is going. And you've been here long enough to understand some of the challenges to the country and to some of the companies that come. But very basic question, Niels, from your experience here and talking about the alternative energy programs and opportunities, what do you think's needed in Brazil as we look forward, let's say, for 2025? What's the future bringing and what does it need?
Okay, so trying to predict what is needed for 2025, that's like that's a funny exercise, and to understand really what I believe, we have to look at what generates energy and what generates electricity today in Brazil, because the drivers for moving into renewable energy are different for Brazil than from other markets. So let me just try to explain a little bit about the electricity mix in Brazil. Brazil is an enormous country. It's the size of a continent and have a lot of natural resources which have been utilized over the years to generate electricity. So the electricity in Brazil comes primarily from hydroelectric power plants. Some of the world's largest in the south of Brazil, for example, in the border with Argentina, we have the Itaipu. We have several other large hydroelectric power plants. So if we add up the green electricity generation, it represents 82% of the electricity mix in Brazil, which is really good, and it's something to be very proud of. Mm-hmm. Brazil has the greenest electricity mix in the world, no doubt about it. So when we talk about renewable energy, it's driven to a very large extent in other countries, especially Europe and the US, by the Paris Agreement and the Sustainable Development Goal number 13 with climate action, mm-hmm. to lower carbon emission and come away from fossil fuels. That's not really the case in Brazil. So if you believe in the 80-20% rule, we have 18% to go to reach 100% green energy, electricity from green energy sources. So what I think is needed is to understand that in a country like Brazil, where you have centralized generation of electricity transmitted and distributed to various regions, that represents very large investments in infrastructure. That infrastructure has to be maintained and operated. Mm-hmm. So the driver here for renewable energy is not necessarily the sustainability or the climate action, but it's the fact that, for example, with solar energy, solar photovoltaic, you can put that on your rooftop generate your own energy, and consume it. And before too long, you would be able to store it in relatively cheap or feasible energy storage solutions, so you can consume it when the sun doesn't shine. And what does that mean really? That means that today, with centralized generation, transmission, and distribution, the energy, the electricity in Brazil is first of all very expensive. It's extremely expensive.
Right.
The quality is not necessarily very good when it gets to the consumer, and because of the infrastructure issues, there are a lot of blackouts. You know that. We've had huge blackouts in Brazil. And for the small and medium-sized company and everybody else, it means that it's very difficult to predict energy prices, for example, because they are based on the water levels in the reservoirs.
Right.
Plan for operational expenditures to, for example, forecast budgeting, operational increase or expansion. So it's very difficult to operate, and it's very difficult to forecast. And the quality and price of electricity is not favorable for economic growth. So if I should say in one word what I would like to see in 2025, to get back to your question, that is a larger degree of autonomy based on distributed generation of electricity, where you generate your own electricity.
Right.
You store it in your battery solutions or whatever you have, and you become self-sufficient in your electricity consumption.
And that's the point where our last discussion of bringing that to the small and medium-sized commercial or industrial consumer, right?
Yeah, because what has been like the thing is that Brazil, those of the listeners who do not know Brazil, they will know already that it's a very sunny place. It's nice. It is the place on the planet with one of the highest solar irradiation. However, we do not have that much solar energy. And it's really funny because one of the markets that we compare ourselves with is Germany. And even Finland has got more electricity generated from solar power, which is really funny. But the solar energy market has been driven primarily these first years since 2012, when the regulator permitted distributed generation, has been driven by the residential market. So that would be you and I putting solar panels on top of our houses, consuming it during the day. And then there's something called net metering, where we can actually generate more energy during the day, more electricity during the day, and put it back into the electricity grid for us to consume at night. And that's called net metering. So that is a type of storage solution where the utility company allows us to put energy into the national grid, or the grid, and then consume at night at the same price. So, and that's been driving the solar revolution, we say. However, if you look at the number of installations today, I think we have about 70,000 installations within what we call distributed generation. And that is impressive, because it's been growing very fast over the last couple of years. In the beginning, it was very slow, but it only represents 1.2% of the entire electricity generated in Brazil.
Well, I'm actually an example. As I mentioned, I'm speaking from Campinas, and here in our region, our energy provider also has a plan for residential installations, is what you call the net metering. But I'd say it's more on an experimental basis. There are companies offering the services for installation, but as a homeowner, the cost of installing that and the payback for that is still not a good trade-off.
No, it's the problem really, and the challenge, and what I think is needed to accelerate the development and rollout of solar solar solutions is financial services to a great extent, because it is not very sophisticated, the financial market in Brazil. Traditionally, there is no large competition between the banks.
Right.
There are different services from different banks, and it can be state-owned development banks or commercial banks that offers to residential consumers like favorable conditions. So that's what's been driving this. But let's say a solar solution has a payback of 7 to 10 years. That means that a bank would need to offer this loan for the consumer not to take money out of their pocket on a similar tenor, right?
Right.
So
that would be my case. For me to make such an investment and to wait 5 to 6 years for the payback really is not viable, even based on, and today the interest rates, as you mentioned, in financial services are extremely high. So
like the interest rates here in the financial services that I've seen for solar installations are between 1% to 3% a month. And that's pretty ludicrous for Europeans to see, who's used to about 6-7% a year. Depending on the financial service and the risk profile. But what has been driving the market has been residential. Now, lately, a very positive tendency is that large corporations such as Ambev, McDonald's, Banco do Brasil, they have entered into what we can call corporate PPAs, power purchasing agreements, or corporate leasing agreements for distributed generation of solar power. And that really just goes to show that the technology is feasible, because otherwise these companies would not have done it.
Right.
And also that it's a good investment, and it is a much cheaper way to generate energy. That's been proven in several cases. So in that way,
these examples that you just mentioned are very recent.
They're very recent. Yeah, we're talking about the last 3 to 6 months.
Yeah.
So it's really a proof of concept that it's both good for economic growth, it's good for the environment, and it's a good investment as well. So that's like a tripod. These three elements go hand in hand. But you see, the point is that the residential market, they have access to financial services to some degree to make these investments or to install these solutions. The larger corporations, they of course have their own bargaining power, and they can guarantee their investment to get a reasonable interest rate. What is missing really is what we can call the middle market, the small and medium-sized enterprises, which, and in any market, 80% of the market is constituted by small and medium-sized enterprises, and normally they would be the ones who catapult an economy out of a crisis. They have difficulties getting access to these feasible financial services. And that is really what, if I say 2025, I really think it's too far ahead. I would like to see it as soon as possible. Services and platforms mitigating the risks that these consumers, they represent, because the profile is different than from McDonald's, for example, or Banco do Brasil, right? No,
and even as you mentioned, for this middle market, and as you mentioned, the cost of energy in Brazil is very high, but it's, let's say, specifically higher for these middle markets because they also don't have advantages that large consumers have in terms of energy. So it's sort of a double negative for them. So the cost of energy is high, the cost of Brazil is high. So for the middle market, for the small and medium-sized industrial or commercial establishment, it's difficult to get started.
Exactly, and it brings me back to what we talked about in the beginning, where I see that what drives the transition to renewable energy in other markets is climate action, which is only one out of 17 sustainable development goals. I see that by accelerating rollout of distributed generation for small and medium-sized commercial and industrial consumers, we would tap into at least 5 or 6 other sustainable development goals, such as responsible consumption and production, economic growth, clean energy, affordable clean energy, and so on and so forth. So I really see that the main driver for accelerating rollout of distributed generation for this segment, small and medium-sized companies, that would be based on their ability to get access to renewable energy at a foreseeable, at a predictable tariff, and also at a higher quality and resilient to distribution net complications. So that's what I would like to see as soon as possible, and rather before 2025.
No, but looking forward, and I agree with you what is needed. And again, speaking to the continental size of Brazil, sometimes there's an advantage of being big, and sometimes there's a disadvantage of being big, because many of these decisions result in the requirements of the political system, the government involvement, and reaching consensus in Brazil is complex, not because of its size, but because of the various divisions within such a large country and different interest groups. So, do you feel things are changing?
I feel things are changing in the surface. It's definitely different approach. The wording is different. I think there's been the consequence. Things have consequences. It's very obvious, but that's only what we see in the press. We have to remember that the Brazilian history has made Brazil what it is today. It's very difficult to change history, and sometimes it's even impossible. So the only thing we can do, being very humble about it, is to do our best in our local communities and try to change things. What I would like to see is much more foreign interest in Brazil, trying to through partnerships and best practices, seeing things evolve into, in my case here, some kind of energy autonomy, some kind of adaptation of what has already shown to work in other markets. And I think that's really crucial. But I definitely think that things are changing. But, change management in a small company, in your family, it's difficult. Imagine in a market with 220 million people. So it's like, that's not going to happen to 2025. But what we can do is that we can try to bridge into other markets that has already evolved into more autonomous electricity generation. Based on best practices. We definitely need to look at how to solve the problem of mitigating the risks that are different for the middle market compared to, for example, residential market or corporates like we've talked about. Because
but when you look out into the world, and speaking specifically of the small and medium-sized commercial and industrial consumer, where do you see these best practices in the world?
No, I see them definitely. If we talk about Europe, for example, Germany is a very good example. Germany has actually been leading the distributed generation movement, and they are world leaders. And now they did net metering as well, so they allowed the consumers to tap into the grid, offload their electricity during sun hours, and consume it at night. They're going away from that, and that's because they see that storage solutions, they are now at a feasible price point. So now now they have a no net metering policy, or trying to implement that. Another market which I see is very, very interesting, and where I've seen new business models being evolved is the U.S. market, definitely. And I think we can compare like both geographically and also consumption-wise to some extent. We can compare Brazil to for example, the Californian market, and I see different business models that has worked. They would need to be adapted to Brazilians' conditions. But one thing which is sure, Thomas, is we're not talking about R&D and technology because the technology is there.
Right.
The need is there. And I would even say that the money is there. The thing is that we need to find a way to close the gap between these feasible projects and the financial resources, because the risks of this market are they're different, and the investor, he's a very conservative person, so he looks at two investment opportunities, and the one with the better return rate and the better numbers will win his attention. Okay,
that's what you mentioned when we were talking about this interview. Was the bankability, right? The ability to have a project and be able to offer that to the financial institutions, and they understand that it's viable. Yeah, and it's financeable. So
I think it's like this. I think it's important to notice that many times these investors, they're administrating other people's money, so they have huge responsibility. So there is, and everybody's talking about impact investment, and this might be considered an impact investment, but that's not philanthropy, right? So it might be the case that these renewable energy projects and energy efficiency projects, I might add, is included as well. They have gained a higher priority. So if an investor has two comparable investments, the one with the larger environmental impact would win his attention over the other. That might be the case. But if the other investment opportunity has the better numbers, it's like money talks. So and that's
money does talk loudly.
It does, and I think we should respect that and understand that, and we should try to find a way to, and that's really the problem, to transmit that to developers around Brazil, for them also to have this vision, but supply them with the practices needed to scout the good feasible projects with the less risks, and then support them in financing them.
Well, Niels, I want to thank you for being part of Talk to Brazil today. We're coming to the end of our time.
Okay.
But one of my key points of whenever I would speak to colleagues in Europe, and specifically in the northern part of Europe, the first thing that they would ask on a telephone call was if the sun was shining.
Okay.
And in Brazil, the sun generally is shining, as you mentioned. But what we see in the future is we need to really transform that sunshine into money.
Exactly.
And into progress. And what you said, it's possible if we follow the best practices, right?
I believe so. I choose to believe so, and I'm convinced. And I might add, the sun will shine again tomorrow. So every day that passes is a lost investment opportunity.
It's shining right here in Campinas, and I'm sure it is in Belo Horizonte. So.
Very much. It's very nice. So no, but I want to thank you for inviting me. It's been a pleasure, and I'm happy to share. It was great having this opportunity to share my vision. So thank you very much.
Now, and we're going to be talking to you again in the future because, as I feel as you do, the future is more consumption of energy, not less.
Yeah. No.
And so more generation is needed. The alternative opportunities are here in Brazil, as they are anywhere else. But this conversation we'll keep up in the future, okay?
Good to hear. Thank you very much, Tom.
And I'd also like to thank our audience for listening and invite you to visit our website, talktobrazil.com, where you will find today's interview with Niels Leidecker and links to his LinkedIn profile. You can also find this and our previous shows of Talk to Brazil on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcast, TuneIn, Himalaya, and many others. And thank our audience and remind everyone that today's program was brought to us by Focus MI Market Intelligence, and Focus MI specializes in market research for the Brazilian agriculture market. More about them on their site, which is focusmi.com. Send your suggestions or comments to me at talktobrazil.com and join the Talk to Brazil group on LinkedIn and follow our discussions. Remember, when you talk to Tom, you talk to Brazil and the world. Goodbye, and thanks for listening. Thanks for listening to Tom Reaoch on Talk to Brazil, the business connector to Brazil.